Hello and welcome back to the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco Rivera and I do presentations on an execution happening soon, including a story on what got the death row inmate sentenced to death. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover a recent crime and conviction. There will also be a link for that. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has signed a 6th death warrant in that state this year for a death row inmate to be executed on April 21st. That inmate is Chadwick Scott Willacy, who is currently 58 years old. 36 years ago, in 1990, when Willacy was 22 years old, he robbed and killed his next-door neighbor, Marlys Mae Sather. Marlys was born in Minnesota in 1934 as Marlys Mae Sather. When Marlys was 18 years old in 1953, she married Rayland Richard Sather, known fondly as Dick. Marlys and Dick raised 3 children. Before moving to Florida, the family had lived in Iowa for a while, and Marlys had later studied at night to earn a bachelor's degree at the age of 45. She went on to earn a master's degree and became employed as a civil servant for the United States government. By 1985, Marlys and Dick were living in this home on Jarvis Street in Palm Bay, Florida, located near Central Florida along the Atlantic Ocean. Marlys was working as a government contract specialist in Florida. She was also a member of the First United Methodist Church, where she sang in the choir. Dick had owned and operated several bowling center businesses much of his life, and in Florida he worked as a sales representative. Dick enjoyed spending much of his time at the horse or greyhound dogs racetracks. 5 years after moving to Florida in 1985, in 1990, Dick had been diagnosed with liver cancer, and he succumbed to his illness on July 8th, 1990. He was 60 years old. Just 2 months later, on September 5th, 1990, Marlys would join her beloved spouse when her life was suddenly taken violently by her next-door neighbor. Early on the morning of September 5th, a Wednesday, Marlys had gone to work her government job a short distance away from home. Marlys had often driven back home on her lunch break, and she did so that day. Meanwhile, while Marlys was at work, or while driving home, a neighbor, Chadwick Willacy, who was 22 years old at the time and lived in a house right next door to Marlys, had broken into Marlys's home and was burglarizing the home when Marlys opened the door and went inside. You can see in these recent images of the properties that there is a wooden fence there now, separating the two houses. But if you go back to some earlier shots I found of the property, there was no fence there, allowing easy access from one house to the next from the back doors. Something to keep in mind as I talk about this case. Now, an Orlando Sentinel newspaper reported that Chadwick Willacy was already very upset with Marlys for failing to pay him for cutting her lawn, but there is no confirmation of that, and it might just be something that he decided to say when he got arrested. What happens next inside the home of Marlys Sather is horrible. Marlys was already deep inside the house when she was confronted by Willacy, so she had no chance to escape. Willacy proceeded to restrain Marlys by tying up her wrists and ankles. He then took her purse and forced her to give him the ATM PIN numbers for her ATM card. He also took Marlys's bank checkbook. Willacy then used a cord to strangle Marlys, but that didn't appear to be working, so he struck her with a heavy object several times in the head, causing Marlys to go unconscious. Willacy then took Marlys's car keys and he drove her car a 1982 Ford LTD, to a bank where he retrieved cash from the ATM. He then drove back to his neighborhood and parked the car around the corner from the house, and then returned to Marlys's house to continue gathering property from inside the home. He had made several trips from Marlys's house to his house, back and forth with stolen items, going through a door on a back porch of the victim's house. And he was using the back porch as a staging area to lay all the stolen items he would then take back to his house. At one point, Willacy went back to Marlys's 1982 Ford LTD and drove it a short distance away to the Lynbrook Plaza shopping center, where he abandoned the vehicle and then jogged back to the victim's house. And then it appears that he realized that Marlys was still alive. So he found a container filled with gas, poured it on her and around her, and then lit a match and set her on fire. He had also disconnected all the smoke detectors in the house. And he also got an electric fan from a bedroom and placed it by Marlys's feet and pointed it at her as an attempt to fan the flames of the fire. Willacy then continued moving stuff from the back porch to his house, and it appears that he had later intended to go back to retrieve the final items, but by that time, someone had arrived at Marlys Sather's home. When Marlys failed to return to work, her employees became concerned and contacted a member of her family. They called the home of Marlys's daughter, Diana Loveridge, but it was her husband, Mr. Denning Loveridge, who answered. Denning said that he would go to Marlys's home to check on her. When he got there, the front door was locked, so he went around back, and the first thing he spotted on the back porch was a shotgun that belongs to his mother-in-law and some electric items from the home. Denning then went inside and discovered the burned remains of Marlys Sather in a bedroom. He could see that her ankles and wrists had been taped and bound. A cord was wrapped around her neck, and her head had been bashed in, and that there had apparently been a fire there. The fire had fizzled out by that time, but a medical examiner would later conclude that it was in fact the fire that killed her. More precisely, smoke inhalation. Investigators lifted fingerprints from the fan near the victim's feet and from the gasoline container and a few other items. Police later found Marlys's car at the shopping center and had also learned of several witnesses that had seen the man driving Marlys's Ford, and they provided a description. On the following day, now Thursday, September the 6th, 1990, investigators got their biggest break yet. The girlfriend of Chadwick Willacy, a woman named Marissa Walcott, called police and said something to the effect of, "Hey, I was just at my boyfriend's house, and as I was going past a trash container, I saw something curious. I took it out, and it was a checkbook, a bank checkbook, belonging to the woman next door that was killed." Somebody should give Miss Marissa Walcott a medal for making that call. She must not have been too fond of her boyfriend. Anyway, police rushed to the house, and during a search, they not only found the checkbook, but a slew of other items stolen from the home of Marlys Sather. They also found clothing that Willacy had been wearing the day before, clothing with bloodstains on them, the blood matching that of the victim. Investigators would also later obtain from a bank photos of Willacy using the victim's ATM card at that bank. So it was pretty much only a matter of time before he was caught anyway. Willacy was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder, burglary, robbery, and arson. About a year later, on October 17, 1991, the jury convicted Willacy on all 4 counts. Following the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury recommended death by a vote of 9-3, and the judge sentenced Willacy to death. Following an appeal about 4 years later, he was sentenced again to death in 1995. And that sentence is expected to be carried out on April 21st of this year. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more of these death row and upcoming execution stories so that you're alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye for now.